Welcome to Excel Magic Trick number 1451. Hey, if you want to download this Excel file, either the start file or the finished file so you can follow along, click on the link below the video. Hey, we got a great video here. We're going to see how to hack the data model, date tables, and DAX measures. Those are formulas that work in a pivot table without buying Power Pivot. Now, in the last video, 1450, we saw how to use in the Data Ribbon tab the Relationships feature to avoid having to use VLOOKUP when we create pivot tables. That feature allows us to build relationships between tables and then build a pivot table and dragging and dropping fields from different tables. This video, we want to take hacking the data model without buying Power Pivot to a new level. We're actually going to see a bunch of functions, calculate same period last year, total year to date, date, add, and more. There's actually a complete list over here, including these. We'll also see how to define a variable inside a DAX formula that's inside our pivot table. And we'll, very importantly, see how to build a date table, which we didn't see how to use in the last video. Last video, we used the grouping feature, which is not efficient if you have big data or if you're trying to use time intelligent functions like same period last year, total year to date, and more. Now, in order to hack the data model like we're going to see here, you have to have Excel 2016. Now, Data Ribbon tab, if you don't have Power Pivot, that button looks like it will work. If I click on it, it says, uh-oh. You have to enable the data analysis add-ins. What it really means is you need to buy the right version, like Office 365 Pro Plus, in order to have Power Pivot. But many of the features we use to build a data model and have formulas in our pivot table are available in any version of Excel 2016. In essence, the data model is behind the scene in Excel 2016. We just can't get to the user interface to do things like build calculated columns or sort by a particular column. We'll have to deal with that issue, sorting by the right month, and we'll see a hack for that. Now, before we build our date table, I want to do the same importing into the data model, the three tables, and building the relationships like we did in the last video. I'm simply going to go to Data, Data Tools, and click on Relationship. I'm going to click New. I've already converted these to Excel tables, so I can select the first table. The first table is always our sales table or transaction table or fact table. Then we select a column we want to relate to a different table. I'm going to select product ID. Related table, that's always the lookup table. So I select D product. It says primary key. That's always a hint because remember, any lookup table, the first column always has a unique list of items. So I select product ID. This is a substitute for VLOOKUP like we saw last video. But what it really does is it builds a one-to-many relationship. Remember, product has a unique list of products. That's the one side. The many side is the fact table where we can sell many of the same products. So when we use create relationship, it builds a relationship and imports them into the data model. Click OK. There's our first relationship. I click New, select the fact table for a second time. Now we want to relate it to sales rep ID. This will be the sales rep table. Notice it says worksheet table. Up here, the last two tables we used in a relationship are now in the data model. So I select D sales rep and then sales rep ID. This will build the relationship and add our third table to the data model. Click OK. So we have our two relationships. This will allow us to drag and drop from all three tables. Now I'm going to close this, and our next step is to build the date table. Now, in order to use time intelligence functions like same period last year and this cool function, total year to date, which does a running total, we have to have a date table with every single day in the year. Now, I already did the min and max on this table. Notice, conveniently, starts at 1/1/2015 and ends at the end of the year. But even if your min date is somewhere in the middle of the year, in order for the time intelligence functions to work, you still need every day in that year. Now, I need to create all the days from January 1, 2015 to the end of 2016. So in the first cell, I type 1/1/2015, Control-Enter to put it into the cell and keep the cell selected. Now I need to fill this down, so I can go to Home, over to Fill, and Series, or I love this trick, that little green box in the lower right-hand corner is called the fill handle. This is the selection cursor. When I hover my selection cursor over the fill handle, I see my crosshair or angry rabbit. Now I'm going to, with my angry rabbit, right-click, drag down one, then back one, and when I let go of the right click, a secret menu pops up, and there's Series. Now this series will allow us to fill either across the rows or down the columns. When you select column, it means I'm going to fill all these dates down a single column. The step value will be 1, and the stop value is simply 12/31/2015. Whoops, 2016. Now, you could build your date table past this last date here if you were going to get new data. But for us, we're just going to put that in. When I click OK, there's all the days. Control down arrow. Remember, we have to have every single day in all of the years in our data set. Now, I want month number, so I'm going to type $MON. There's our month function tab. Left arrow. From that serial number date, Control-Enter. Now I'll get the month number. Double-click and send it down. Now, normally, we have to have this if we're using the real Power Pivot data model. So I showed you that because it's important. I'll hint at this later, but for us, we're not going to need it because we're going to have to use a hack. Now, we want the year tab, serial number. There it is. Control-Enter. Double-click and send it down. In essence, we want all of the attributes in our date table that we might use in the row, column, or slicer area for our pivot table. Now, month, I want the name of the month. Over here in Excel, we use the text function. If you were over in Power Pivot, you'd have to use the format function. Hey, there's the value, comma. Then you have to know the custom number formatting. In double quotes, since we want month, 3-letter abbreviation, I type MMM. End double quote, close parentheses, Control-Enter, double-click and send it down. That goes from a serial number to the actual month. So in the row area, we'll be able to drag the year and the month. Now, there's all sorts of other attributes you can have, fiscal year, fiscal quarter, and so on. I have a great reference video for building all those different types of formulas in Excel right there. For us, that's all we're going to do. Now, I'm going to click in a single cell. We need to convert this to an Excel table to get it into the data model. Control-T, either click OK or Enter. Immediately, we want to go up and name it. Design, Properties, and up here, do not put Table 2, Table 3, Table 4 into your data model. You got to give it a good name. Now I'm going to use D, date. Now the D is for dimension in business intelligence, data warehousing, databasing. Dimension to us in Excel means lookup table, but it's a dimension or an attribute table. So this one's called D, date. This one's called D, sales rep, D, product, and F for fact, sales table. Now we can go back up to data, relationships, new. We want our fact table. Now we're going to use date, the D date worksheet, but it will be in the data model soon enough. Date, click OK. Now I'm going to close this, and we're going to start our pivot table, and we will see that there is a problem with date table like this, and we'll have to fix it. I'm going to click in a single cell, go up to Insert Pivot Table, or use the keyboard Alt-N-V. Now, because we have tables and relationships in the data model, it assumes that we want that, and we do. R15 is fine. Click OK. Now, look at that. 4 tables I can drag and drop from any table I want. But let's go ahead and drag just the month name down to rows. Oh, no. It is sorting alphabetically. The data model is not like an Excel pivot table, which has access to a custom list. So we have to fix it. Now, if we're in the data model itself, we would just go to the table in the data model, click in the month column, and there's a Sort By button, and we'd say sort it by the month number. So that's why you need the month number. But if we don't have the data model, we can't do that. So we're going to have to fix it right here so that it will automatically sort alphabetically. Click in the top cell F2. And instead of MMM, I want to put MM space dash space. Now, MM gives us 1 to 12 for month with a leading 0, which is exactly what we want. If we did just one M, it would give me 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, 11. And then 1 and 10 would be next to each other, which is not what we want. Leading 0 will work. And now when I hit Enter, now I have the month number, which will sort alphabetically perfectly. If I scroll down, I can see it gives me 2 and so on. Now I can come over to the pivot table, right-click, refresh, and there we go. It's sorting correctly. Now I can come over to year and drag it above rows. And there we go, the start of our pivot table. Now I'm going to scroll over here. And for the time being, I'm going to drag the pivot table field list over here. Now, in order to create measures, usually we could go to the Power Pivot Ribbon tab or over to the data model and create the formulas in the measure grid. But over here in the pivot table field list, it's totally awesome in Excel 2016. You can come to whichever table you want your measure to show up in and right-click the table. And there it is, Add Measure. So I'm going to add a measure. And here's our measure dialog box. We put our measure name. We're going to start with total sales. And we come down here, and we just want a simple formula to start off. So we're going to use the sum function, open parentheses, F sales, down arrow to our sales column, tab, close parentheses. And this is a totally awesome feature in a data model pivot table using a DAX formula. We can attach number formatting to our formula. This formula, total sales, will appear in our field list, and we can use it over and over again. Just this one trick alone is a big advantage over a standard pivot table, where every time we drag a field, we have to add number formatting. So I'm going to add 2 decimals, click OK. Then over here in the field list, there's our f of x icon. That means this is a measure. When I drag it down to values, look at that. I could drag this 10 times down here, and every time that number formatting follows the measure around. I'm going to drag that off. Now, we want to see a couple time intelligence functions. Now, already we used the data model and dragged total sales here. What you don't want to do is drag the sales field or the date field. If I drag sales down here, it will create a measure for me, but it's called an implicit measure. And it won't let us do things like change the name or add number formatting. So you don't want to drag and drop. You want to create your own measure by right-click, Add Measure. If you drag the date field down here, it'll automatically use the grouping feature, which adds a bunch of extra columns that we don't need. We specifically built a date table. But you can, if you drag and drop fields, use the normal functions and show values as features in a data model pivot table. It's just not the most efficient way to do things. Now, the next thing is I would like a column that shows me the sales from last year. Now, this is a simple 2-year pivot table, but down here I want to see the actual amount from last January, last February, and so on. So I'm going to click inside the pivot table. Now, before we right-click and create that measure for total sales last year, we want to talk about how a measure is working. Because remember, it's the sum function. But how in the world does it know to add just for July 2015? Well, in each cell in the pivot table, we have something called filter context. That just means the formula can see the row area criteria or the column filter or slicer criteria. It knows to then go to the underlying data set, filter the actual date table down to just August 2015. That filter flows from the date table. Remember, it's reduced down to just the rows for August. That filter flows across the relationship, hits the F sales, and the F sales table is filtered down to just the sales for August 2015. That is one of the reasons that the data model works quickly on big data. Now, that's going to help us to understand how some of the formulas we create work. Because when we create a DAX measure, it'll always see the filter context or the criteria from the row, column, filter, or slicer area. Now, there's a special function called calculate, which can change the filter context. So for example, down here, if I use calculate, I can also use inside calculate same period last year. And it will know to look at March 2016, and it will automatically go back, changing the filter context from 2016 to 2015. So let's see this, the calculate and same period last year function. Right-click, add measure. We're going to call this last year sales, equal sign, and I'm going to type the letter C. That's all you have to do to get to calculate, and tab. The expression, that's the formula we want to use, and then the filter will allow us to change the filter context for that expression or formula. Now, when you're building DAX formulas, the only time you use just square brackets is when you want to use a measure. All other fields in the database, you use table name and the field name. Now notice I type a square bracket, and it's trying to help me with that convention, suggesting the functions. Well, there's only one, so I hit tab. Now, comma. Now the filter. I get to change the filter context. Now remember, from the pivot table, for example, August 2015, that will flow in to calculate. But calculate can change it. So now I'm going to type SAM, their same period last year, tab. Now, the cool thing about this function is all I need to do is give it the date column. Now, remember, this is a column in our data set. So I'm going to type DD. There's the date table. I'm going to down arrow. And our convention is name of the table, and in square brackets, the field name or column name, tab. That's all we need for same period last year, close parentheses. That's sitting in filter. August 2015. Let's see, August 2016 will flow in. Same period last year, we'll know to jump back to August of 2015. And then same period last year will provide a valid list of dates for calculate, which calculate will then help filter the underlying sales table so that our formula total sales can calculate just on last year's August. Now I'm going to close parentheses, add some number formatting. That alone is worthy of using the data model and DAX formulas. Click OK. Now if I drag last year sales, there we go. It was smart enough to know there weren't any last year. Now I would like to change this. I do not want anything in the grand total. I do want something here for the yearly totals, especially if we had many years, because notice That's last year's total. So that same period last year knew to get all of the months for last year, boom, and calculate the correct total. And for an individual month, here's August 2016 is our row area criteria, flows in, but of course it got the right number from last year. Now I'd like to turn off the grand total, so let's edit. Right-click, Edit Measure. Now what I want to ask is I want to ask a logical question, so as the formula is copied down throughout all the rows in the pivot table, when it gets to the grand total, I want it to show nothing. The way we're going to do that is we're going to ask, hey, each cell in the pivot table, is there exactly 1 year? Notice for each month, of course, all of these are 2016. When it gets down to the 2016 total cell, still 1 year. But when it gets down to grand total, there's multiple years, 15 and 16. So we're going to come before calculate, and I'm going to use the if function, just like we would in Excel, if tab, logical test. And now I'm going to use this cool function, type the letter H, down arrow, has one value, checks a column, and will tell you if it has a single value in it, tab. Down arrow to year. Notice we're using the convention table and then field name. Close parentheses, comma. Now I'm going to click back over here. Has one value. That means it's looking at the underlying data model year column. And that year column is going to be filtered down to just one value everywhere except in the grand total. So that will work. When it's true, it will run the formula. Now, unlike Excel's if, comma, we would put something like double quote to show nothing. But in DAX, if we leave the result if false out in if, it will use the blank function, which is a substitute. It either means empty cell in Excel or a null value like in a database. So I'm going to backspace. I'm not even going to put result if false in, close parentheses, and that formula will work. Click OK. And there the grand total is turned off. Now, this formula is not available in a standard pivot table. The next one we're going to create, which is the difference between this year and last year, that calculation is there. Show values as, difference from. But again, there are many advantages to using the data model. So let's create our next formula. Right-click, Add Measure. I'm going to call it something like diff from last year. And guess what? We're going to use two measures and subtract them. Square bracket, down arrow to total sales. Remember, the convention is use a measure, only the measure in square brackets, minus square bracket, down arrow, tab. So we'll get this year's minus last year's. And just this alone, adding this, number formatting, attaching it to the formula is beautiful. Click OK. Now if I scroll down, difference from last year. And there's the whole column. Now I'd like to amend the formula so we don't show anything for the previous year, including the year. And I don't want the grand total to show either. Well, notice we already created a measure last year sales, and we have a bunch of blanks here. So we can ask the question of that measure, are you greater than 0? So let's come over, right-click, Edit. And before our subtraction, I'm going to type if, square bracket, down arrow to get the measure last year sales, tab, are you greater than 0? If that comes out true for the logical test, comma, result of true. We don't put result if false because it'll put a blank in. Close parentheses, click OK. And there our formula is working. Now, we actually have two more formulas. I want to do difference from the previous month. I actually forgot. I meant to do the easiest formula second, which is a running total. So let's do that one now, and we'll drop it right after total sales down here. A running total is simple. In the cell for January, I need the total. Cell for February, I need the previous 2 months total, and so on all the way down to December, where we'll have the grand total. So I come over to F Sales, right-click, add measure. We'll call this running total. I click after the equal sign, total, and look at that. Total month to date, quarter to date, year to date. So that's the one we want. Tab. The expression, square bracket. Down arrow to total sales, tab. Dates, all I have to put in is DD, the actual date column, tab. I could add a filter. If I had a different year end than December 31st, I could put it there. We do not, so I close parentheses. That's the formula for running total. Currency, 2 decimals, click OK. Now I am going to drag running total down right after total sales, and there's our running total. Now, I'd definitely like to turn this off. And similar to the formulas over here where we used HASONEVALUE on the year, I don't want it on the year. I do not want the actual year for either year or the grand total. So here I'm going to use HASONEVALUE on the month. Right-click, Edit Measure. Before TOTALYTD, if, tab, H, down arrow, tab. I see the date month, down arrow, tab, close parentheses, comma. Result if false, I come to the end, close parentheses. Click OK. And there we have our running total. Now, this is another formula that is available inside a standard pivot table. That would be running total. By the way, difference from last year and then the month one we're going to do in running total, those are in a standard pivot table. But all of the functions that we used here, if you want to see a great example of all of these functions in a pivot table example where standard pivot table will not work, you can just watch 2 videos ago, 1449. That shows you how to use the actual data model. But the formulas in there take all the basics we learned in this video and show you a really cool example of what to do when you have incomplete years for standard pivot table calculations that will not work. But with DAX, you can get them to work. But even if we have these standard calculations that we could do in a standard pivot table, being able to avoid the VLOOKUPs, attach number formatting. And if you had real big data and you used get and transform, which is Power Query, to import it into the data model, again, these tricks we're learning here without Power Pivot are pretty useful. All right, we have one last formula, and we want to always calculate the difference between the previous month. So we come over, right-click, Add Measure. Now I'm going to start off and call it last month's sales, and we'll come back and change it later because we're going to change the meaning of the formula. But here, let's just see how to get last month's. Well, if we're changing the filter context, C tab to get calculate. Square bracket, down to total sales, tab, comma. And we need to jump back 1 month using the filter. We need a valid list of dates from the previous month. So now we get to use this great function, DATEADD. Now, DATEADD is like a supercharged EDATE function in Excel. Now, EDATE in Excel jumps backwards or forwards a number of months. But DATEADD can do months, quarters, days, years. So it's like a supercharged EDATE. Now, dates is the first argument. DD, down arrow to the date column, tab, comma, number of intervals. Now, we're going to jump back a month. So just like we would in EDATE or some of the other date functions in Excel, 1 jumps forward, 0 would give you this month, and -1 means go back. But here's the next argument that's so cool, comma, interval, and we can jump back day, month, quarter, or year. So I'm going to down arrow to month and tab, close parentheses. So DATEADD is much more versatile than EDATE. Not only that, but EDATE only returns a single date. DATEADD is returning a table of valid dates that can use to calculate the correct total sales. Now, close parentheses, add some number formatting. Click OK. We're going to drag this to the pivot table and see trouble. Or not trouble, but not exactly what we want. Drag it down. And there's our last month's. All of these are correct. Right there, for December, it's listing November's amount. Right here, this is listing January's amount. Now, we want to change this formula. I don't want last month. I want diff from last month. Now, over here, we did two different formulas for getting the difference. So over in this column here, we're actually going to need to use the last month's sales twice. Once to calculate last month's and once to run a logical test. What that means is if we come over and right-click Edit, that formula element right there is going to be run two different times. If we have that situation, we can actually define a variable inside our DAX formula. Now, we cannot do that in Excel. We cannot do that in a standard pivot table. But over in DAX, we can do that. Now, let's first see if we can just get the variable to work. I'm going to hit Enter. And after the equal sign, you type VAR space. That var is a keyword that means this is going to be a variable. Then we type the name of the variable. Last month space equal sign space. And then I'm going to delete. var is the keyword that means variable. There's the name of our variable we can use later in our formula. What is our variable equal to? That's what it's equal to. Now, we come to the end. In order to get it work, we hit Enter and then type another keyword, return. Now, when we hit Enter, we can type whatever formula we want and use last month as many times as we'd like. Now, let's just start off with the difference part. Square bracket T, there's our total sales. And watch this, minus. And as soon as I type the letter L, I can see in my dropdown last month. Now, if you're over in Power BI Desktop or the actual Power Pivot Data Model, there's a little icon that says XY, meaning this is a variable. But now I'm going to down arrow, tab. That's pretty amazing. Now, I definitely want to change the name. This is going to be called diff from last month. Now, that formula is not finished yet, but let's just check it and see if it works. Click OK. And look at that. It's totally calculating the difference. Now, we have a problem here because it took all of January and subtracted nothing from the past. And we don't want our formula to run in the total or grand total. So for this column, we don't have a single logical test. I'm simply going to ask the logical question for each cell. Is the previous month sales greater than 0? And that will be asking a question of the variable. And does the month column have one single value? All of these will be true. All of these will be true for last month's sales are greater than 0. That's the only one for this first series of months where both logical tests will not pass. Down here, the test for checking for the month will fail, and down here also. So now we can come over, right-click, Edit. And before total sales, type the if function. Now, logical test, we have two tests. Both have to come out true, so we use the AND function. Now, the AND function is similar to over in Excel. Over in Excel, we actually can have up to 255 logical tests. Here, we just have 2. Our first one, H, down arrow, has one value. Down arrow to D-date month, tab. So we're checking for the month, our first test. Close parentheses. There's logical 1, comma. Logical 2, our variable. L, down arrow. Last month sales, are you greater than 0? That's the second logical test. Close parentheses. Comma for logical test. There's the result of true. That entire and there, when both of them come out true, then we'll run our formula. Otherwise, no comma, close parentheses to put a blank in. Click OK. And there our formula is working. And we got to use a variable and refer to that formula element twice in our formula. All right, well, that was a lot of fun with hacking The built-in data model, even if we don't have Power Pivot installed, we saw a bunch of different formulas. We saw a bunch of different DAX functions, including if, has one, and not. We did not see is blank. And we saw a variable. Most importantly, we saw how to use in the Data Ribbon tab relationships to get our different tables into the data model and build a relationship. We saw how to build a date table in Excel, including a column that will allow us to drag month in there without using sort by column. Then we saw measures and how cool are they. They have their own number formatting. And even sometimes we're allowed to make some calculations that are not built into a standard pivot table. And if you haven't watched this one, be sure and go and watch that one. That one will build on some of the basics we saw in this video, showing calculations that are not possible with the standard pivot table. All right, that was a lot of fun hacking Excel 2016 without Power Pivot. If you like this video, be sure to comment, click that thumbs up, and sub. We'll see you next video.